In this video, we're going over the best monsters that have 2500 attack, an attack threshold for a lot of boss monsters actually. And at number 10, we have the Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon. This is a level 9 synchro monster of the Blue Eyes White Dragon archetype, and was kind of crucial to the success of Blue Eyes decks in the 2016 World Championship, where a Blue Eyes player actually won thanks to this card. Well, also, and a little bit, Dragon Spirit of White, another 2500 attack monster, which is very fitting for this list. You see, this synchro monster has 3 effects. One of them is a passive lockdown, where neither player can special summon 2 or more monsters at the same time. It can once per turn negate the effect of a card in the graveyard, and it can tag out into another Dragon Light type synchro monster from the extra deck, like Azure Eyes Silver Dragon, who himself is a level 9 synchro monster that can special summon normal monsters from the graveyard during the standby phase. And the card itself is easy to bring out, it just requires a tuner and a non-tuner Blue Eyes monster. And most of the Blue Eyes specific tuners are level 1, with nearly all of the Blue Eyes monsters being level 8. So it wasn't a difficult synchro monster to bring out in Blue Eyes decks at all. And it had a little bit of things going well for it. Pendulum decks were kind of in full swing at this time, so its first effect completely shut down Pendulum decks from being able to do their thing. And a lot of people were running Phantom Knights at the World Tournament, which is a deck that's all about graveyard effects. So this card single-handedly countered about half of the decks in the event. And funny thing is, the Blue Eyes decks were so good at countering the meta in that specific time period for that event, that the final match was actually a Blue Eyes mirror match. Both the first and second place of the World Tournament were Blue Eyes decks, something that hasn't really happened since Blue Eyes decks are generally not super good in the current meta. They kind of go by another name in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, known as Brick Eyes, because it plays so many high-level monsters, so it's real easy to get an unusable hand. Even so, a card that almost single-handedly allowed the Blue Eyes decks to win a World Tournament should definitely make it on this list, but only at the number 10 spot. And at number 9, we have Invoked Mechaba. This is a light fusion monster of the Invoked engine, a deck that has fusion monsters for all the attributes, and their little gimmick is they can use your opponent's monsters in their graveyard as their fusion materials. But generally, Invoked decks will also play light monsters so they can go into this card. And they go into it very easily, so the fact that it has a great effect on top of its easy summoning condition is why it's definitely a meta card that sees lots of success. As what this card does is once per turn you can negate the effect of a card as long as you discard a card from your hand of the same type. So exactly like the counter trap card Ultimate Providence, except you also get to banish the card after you negate its effect, which is much better than destroying it. So if your opponent activates a monster card, for example, you would have to discard a monster from your hand to negate it, a spell card for a spell card, and so on and so on. And since this card is easy to get out, it just allows you to have another negate on the board, in order to help you set up a board full of monsters with negates, as that's kind of the metagame for a lot of decks, trying to get out as many monsters that have a negate as possible, so you can stop your opponent from playing the game. And at number 8, we have number S39, Utopia the Lightning. This is a rank 5 Xyz monster which can be brought out by simply ranking it on top of a rank 4 Utopia monster you control, and has the effect where, if this card battles, you can detach 2 of its materials to set its attack to 5,000 for that battle. And if this card declares an attack, your opponent can't activate any card effects until the end of the damage step. And basically, since this card can be brought out with any 2 level 4 monsters, if you just rank it up on top of Utopia or one of its other forms to give it more Xyz materials, this card basically gave any level 4 toolbox easy access to a 5,000 attack monster that could beat over basically anything, and really help those toolboxes deal with problem cards like Towers or Ultimate Falcon. Ultimate Falcon can kind of win you games on its own because it's an immune monster with 3,500 attack, but Utopia the Lightning can just beat over it as long as you have 2 level 4 monsters, and the Utopia cards in your extra deck to go into it. Although it's not used as much today as it was in Master Rule 4, but it was still one of the few Xyz cards that consistently saw play during Master Rule 4 because it was just that good. And at number 7, we have Earthbound Immortal Aslla Piscu. This card has the effect where, if it's sent from the field to the graveyard except by its own effect, you can destroy all of your opponent's monsters and then inflict 800 damage to your opponent for each monster they control. So if you simply combo this card with Black Garden and Union Carrier, it's possible to give your opponent 5 tokens during your first turn, with Aslla Piscu equipped to one of your monsters, and then just send that monster to the graveyard in order to activate its effect from the spell and trap card zone, since it counts as being face up on the field, and being destroyed by something that's not its own effect. And since it's so easy to set up this combo for a whole bunch of different kinds of decks, all you have to do is get off this effect 2 times during your first turn and you can FTK your opponent. They can also be brought out with number 29 Mannequin Cat, targeting one of your opponent's black garden tokens, for basically the same effect. The effect is a little bit too easy to pull off, so don't be surprised if this card gets banned in the future. It also has another effect if you're not trying to cheese out an FTK, where it can attack directly and can't be attacked while on the field, but also it destroys itself if you don't have a face-up field spell card, so it actually is pretty useful on the field. A 2500 attack direct attacker who can't be targeted by attacks is pretty useful. Just not like something you'd build your deck around useful. That's kind of slow unless it does something else, and this card definitely does something else, which is why it makes it on this list. And at number 6, we have Eldlich, the Golden Lord. This card is the main combo piece of the Eldlich archetype, because basically all of their spell and trap cards require an Eldlich monster to be on the field in order to use their effects or gain extra effects, and there is only one Eldlich monster in the game. Luckily, the Eldlich monster is actually super good, and so good that it has a whole bunch of meta decks dedicated to it, or use it as an engine in order to supplement other decks. And what this card does is it has a hand and graveyard effect, where its hand effect allows you to get rid of cards on the field, by sending itself and one spell or trap card from your hand to the graveyard in order to target one card on the field and just send it to the graveyard, which is non-destruction removal. And its graveyard effect allows you to send a card in your spell and trap card zone to the graveyard in order to add this card back to your hand. Special summon a zombie type monster from your hand, and then give that monster 1000 attack and defense and make it so they can't be destroyed by card effects until the end of your opponent's next turn. And it definitely can choose itself. So it can come out and have 3500 attack and be destruction immune for a turn with its own effect. And I think that's kind of why it has 2500 attack, because it definitely intended to be brought out with its graveyard effect. So if it was the standard boss monster level of 3000 attack, that would have made it a 4000 attack beater that's immune to destruction, which is a little bit too much. But 3500 is a lot more reasonable. That's like Ultimate Falcon's levels of attack. And at number 5, we have True King Lithosagym, the Disaster. This card has a grand total of 3 effects. One of them is for how this card can be summoned, where you can destroy up to 2 other face-up monsters you control or in your hand, including at least 1 Earth monster. Then you get to special summon this card. Its second effect takes place if both of the monsters you chose to destroy were Earth attribute instead of just one of them, where you can then look at your opponent's extra deck and banish up to 3 monsters from it with different names. It was this effect that actually got the card banned for a while, because that's super good, as a lot of decks only play 1 copy of their main combo pieces in the extra deck, so you could kind of win the game with this effect alone against certain decks. And its last effect is a floating effect, where if this card is destroyed by card effect, you can special summon a non-Earth worm type monster from your graveyard. Seeing as this card was mainly played in dinosaur decks, that floating effect didn't really come into play very much. Although dinosaurs love to destroy their own cards as they gain great benefits from it, especially cards like Baby Ceratosaurus, which is also Earth attribute, so it comboed a little bit too well in an already good deck, which is why the card is still currently limited to this day. It's no longer banned at the very least, but it's still super strong because of how extra deck reliant so many decks are. And at number 4, we have Block Dragon. This card has a floating effect that can allow you to go +2, which sounds super good, but it was only usable with a very unpopular type of monster. So for a long time it only saw niche play, until an actual good archetype with rock monsters came out, and then this card kinda shot up in usefulness, and is now considered a little bit broken. So depending when you're watching this video, it might already be banned, same with Aslla Piscu. So Block Dragon, it can't be normal summoned or set, and can only be special summoned from your hand or graveyard by banishing 3 Earth monsters from your hand or graveyard. So its summoning condition can be activated from the graveyard, which makes this card even better. And then while it's on the field, it gives your rock type monsters some protection. That's not really why it's used. It's its next effect, where if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, that means you can activate its floating effect by just using it as a link material or something. You can then add up to 3 rock type monsters from your deck to your hand, as long as their total levels equal exactly 8. And what do you know? The new meta archetype Emancipators are all level 4 and 2, so it's very easy to get level 8 from searching those cards out, especially if you just throw a Doki Doki into the mix. So a card that is able to bring itself out easily and has an excellent conditions for its floating effect, which allows you to gain even more advantage off of it. It's really hard to find monsters that are better than Black Dragon for the 2500 attack range. And at number 3, we have Astrograph Sorcerer. This is a pendulum monster that is currently banned because it works a little bit too well with pendulum decks. You see, Astrograph Sorcerer has this effect that if a card you control is destroyed, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then you get to choose one monster in your graveyard, extra deck, or that is currently banished, which was destroyed this turn, and then you get to add one monster with the same name as that monster from your deck to your hand. This effect is not once per turn, and that's probably why it's banned, because let me tell you a little bit about pendulum decks to understand what's so good about that. You see, pendulum decks love to destroy their own monsters and their scales, because pendulum monsters go to the extra deck when they're destroyed on the field, and a lot of the best archetypes of the pendulum monsters gain effects when they're destroyed on the field in the same way, or just destroy themselves in order to do things. So for just playing a pendulum deck normally, you'll be able to fulfill the conditions of Astrograph Sorcerer to special summon itself from your hand, and then go +1 off of that summon. It's kind of like if Elemental Hero Stratos had 700 more attack and could special summon itself from your hand. That's basically Astrograph Sorcerer. And Elemental Hero Stratos was banned for years because it's a card that can search from the deck without a once per turn restriction on its search effect. Just to give a little context on how powerful this is, and what a little bit of an oversight it was, and how incredibly easy it is to actually use the effect. If you have this card in your hand and you're playing a pendulum deck, you're going to go +1. If you have multiple copies in your hand, you're going to get even more pluses. In fact, there are some pendulum cards that allow you to add this card back to your hand from the extra deck, to allow you to go for even more cards. In fact, the only limiter to this card is that you might run out of targets to search out from the deck, because it does require you to have copies of that card you want to search out in your graveyard, banish zone, or extra deck face up. Now, the card also has some other effects, but those aren't why this card is good or banned. It can also banish a combination of cards to allow you to special summon Supreme King Zark from your extra deck, and its pendulum effect allows you to destroy it in order to special summon a Stargazer Magician from your deck, or set it as one of your pendulum scales. And at number 2, we have Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal. This is a rank 6 Xyz monster who can be brought out with any 2 level 6 monsters, or by ranking it up on top of a Dante monster by sending it a Burning Abyss monster from your hand to the graveyard. And then it has the effect where, on a quick effect, it can detach one of its materials to send any one card from your deck to the graveyard. And it also has a floating effect where if it's destroyed, you can special summon any Burning Abyss monster from your extra deck, ignoring its summoning condition. Now, the reason this card sees as much play as it does, and why it's limited to 1 on the ban list, is because of the effect to send any one card from your deck to the graveyard attached to an extra deck monster. You see, there are so many combos and strategies where you want a specific card in the graveyard, but that require you to get some kind of specific card from your deck in order to get that card in the graveyard, like Foolish Burial or Armageddon Knight, 2 cards that are also currently limited. There's a couple of cards on this list that are useful in the graveyard, like Black Dragon or Eldlich the Golden Lord, as a whole bunch of FTK decks or just indestructible combo boards are made much better if you're able to send one specific key combo piece from your deck to the graveyard. And since it's on an extra deck monster, that means you only need to get out 2 level 6 monsters in order to perform that specific mill, rather than searching out a specific card to perform a specific mill. One of them is much easier to do than the other, and that's also why Lavalval Chain is banned, since that card was even easier to bring out and can basically perform the same function. Being able to selectively mill a card from the deck is super powerful, even more so on cards with generic materials. The only reason Beatrice isn't also banned is because it's harder to bring out than Lavalval Chain, and it also just happens to have 2500 attack, which isn't super useful for the card. Then again, a lot of the cards in this list don't really care about their attack power value very much. It just happens to have 2500 attack, and just happens to have a very good effect in a whole bunch of combo decks. And at number 1, we have Firewall Dragon, one of the original Link monsters that came out, and is currently banned because they forgot to give it a once per turn on one of its effects. You see, once Link monsters first came out, They also came out with Master Rule 4, which severely limited how you could use previous extra deck monsters, and a lot of people were not happy about this new ruling. So they tried to make some of the first Link monsters very powerful in order to kind of compensate for not being able to do a whole bunch of past strategies. And Firewall Dragon was meant to be the poster boy of those kinds of cards. It was a Link 4 monster with very generous arrows, which meant it could be used as a starter or an extender. It required any 2+ monsters, so it could be brought out with nothing but tokens if you wanted. It had the ability to bounce cards in the field or return cards from the graveyard to your hand, equal to the number of cards it was culling to, on a quick effect. So it had a useful effect it could use immediately or during your opponent's turn to disrupt plays, since it could be used as a recovery tool or a way to push for game. And then it had one more little innocuous effect, that if a monster this card points to is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one monster from your hand. This was supposed to make link climbing a lot easier, as you could just link summon with the monster this card pointed to in order to get another card out of your hand easier, and since it was only from your hand, you were kind of limited in the resources that you could special summon with the effect, as special summoning monsters from the hand is kind of the weakest place to special summon a monster from. If you were to make a tier list of the best places to special summon a monster from, with the hand, extra deck, graveyard, or banish zone, the hand would be at the bottom of that list. But here's the thing about this effect. This is actually the broken part of the card because it's not once per turn. So if you simply found a way to loop a couple of cards, you could use something like Cannon Soldier in order to tribute that card that you were trying to loop in order to perform an FTK. One of the more famous examples was a Assault Core. It has an effect that allows you to add a Union monster from your graveyard to your hand when it's sent from the field to the graveyard. And it itself is a Union monster, so you could just loop 2 copies of them with Firewall Dragon and Cannon Soldier in order to burn your opponent for all their life points during your first turn. And it was very easy to set up, so what they did was limit a Assault Core rather than ban Firewall Dragon, because they wanted Firewall Dragon to be useful to all the other decks in order to allow the Link monsters to really help decks rather than limit them. However, people just kept finding ways to abuse its last effect, so eventually they relented and just banned the card, like they should have done from the very beginning. And it stayed banned because the effect is still super strong even today, and would be a lot more useful after the Master Rule revisions loosen the restrictions on extra deck summoning. So don't expect to see the card unbanned anytime soon, unless they slap a hard once per turn on that last effect. Alright, and that's the list. There are a ton of really good monsters at 2500 attack. So there's a good chance I might have missed something good. If you can think of any other better cards that should have made this list, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one. And also, if you like these scripted, highly edited videos on Yu-Gi-Oh! And maybe have a passing interest in D&D, then you might like my new channel, TheDuelLogs, which basically has videos just like this but about Dungeons & Dragons, which will be linked in the video description and at the end of the video right now.